In this brief lecture, I'm going to highlight the important points I'd like you to understand about the work of Piaget, the work of Vygotsky, and information processing theory. Hopefully, you'll find the general ideas pretty consistent with what we've covered on earlier chapters about this important theoretical work. When we're thinking about middle childhood and we're considering the work of Piaget, we want to think about concrete operational thought. This is the stage of cognitive development where a young person is able to reason logically about something and can pull from their own direct experiences and perceptions to solve problems. They can detect patterns and are often very, very strong at identifying rules and exceptions to rules. And they are beginning to learn how to draw inferences from the information that they have directly in front of them. In middle childhood, you will often find that academic achievement or learning something can become intrinsically motivating for some children. For example, those that choose to participate in the spelling bee are often kids that have really strong memories, either a visual memory or a phonetic memory or a rote memory, where you can do facts and figures pretty well with rehearsal. And by participating in activities like a spelling bee or a GeoBee, they get to experience a lot of social reward and a sense of accomplishment for these critical skills. If you are interested in seeing what these skills are like, check out the independent film called Spellbound, which is all about spelling bee culture. I believe it's free in a lot of streaming services, and it's a really intriguing film for looking at how children in this age are trying to identify themselves through their cognitive skills. What you also see in that film is how adult expectations can either help a child be enthusiastic about what they're learning or sometimes diminish their enthusiasm. In fact, as we think about Piaget, we also know that during this time period of the age of 6 to 11, children get better and better at developing internal organization of ideas. So they begin to classify information at a much higher level and to be able to put things in order, a skill we call seriation. So in classification, by the age of 8, most children can classify objects into groups based on a common characteristic, such as separating mammals from reptiles. Seriation has to do with putting knowledge in order, either chronologically or in steps of a process. Can also put things in order based on sort of qualitative characteristics. Moving from Piaget to Vygotsky, we see that his theory suggests that the role of culture in instruction is very, very important in the middle childhood years. In fact, as you might recall, Vygotsky always emphasizes the social relationship, the collaborations that the child will seek as a way of promoting learning. And education in these elementary years is really going to happen all the time while the child is in formal schooling, in their after-school programs, and at home. And the role of the adult is to try to provide enough support and guidance that the child can be successful, not only at the skills that he has already mastered, but that he can feel a sense of success and achievement in those skills that are just beyond his reach. You want to remember that the zone of proximal development is what we're aiming for. In other words, you want to help a child get to a skill that is just outside of mastery, in that zone of development where we are going to perhaps scaffold and support, and as soon as they have the skill, we can remove our supports and they will have accomplished it. During the elementary years, you can think of those learners as apprentices. They learn by doing, they learn by cooperating with others, and they learn by watching their models. And Vygotsky would say the development of complex language that happens in middle childhood is absolutely essential for the learning process that will take place. In fact, as we get to information processing theory in a moment, we'll see that Vygotsky was actually a little bit looking ahead, because information processing theory suggests that we need good language in order to create the organizational structures for our ideas, that those things really do work together. So we do want to remember that Vygotsky puts an awful lot of importance on culture and has given us many examples of how a child's experiences will shape the skills that they learn. So, for example, there's a cultural example given in your textbook of the children of Varanasi in India who sleep by the river in the daytime and then you spend their time guiding people to different places within their community, oftentimes at night. Their sense of direction is thought to be more finely honed than in children from other cultures where this activity of leading a stranger to find a place that they don't know about has not been practiced. So Vygotsky would say your culture gives you opportunities to practice, which affects how children learn, not just what they learn, but how they learn it. So we've got Piaget telling us that middle childhood is bringing us to some logical thinking and providing the cognitive structures to organize our thoughts. We have Vygotsky telling us that socialization and the apprenticeship role in school is really critical for children of this age. Now, the information processing theorists, remember these are the ones that suggest that human thinking is kind of similar to how computers work, that you have to gather data, analyze the data to get to an answer. Like computers, people sense and perceive a large amount of information, and we need to have the cognitive infrastructure to process that information and then express what we've learned from the process. So from an information processing theory perspective, we find that middle childhood is a time where brain growth in the frontal lobes continues to occur, and you continue to see improvements in the connectivity and the automaticity. In other words, how quickly something is done. So you don't need to use intentional resources. It's sort of put on autopilot. So we see increasing neurological connections. We see more tasks going into autopilot during middle childhood, telling us that we are seeing growth in several different kinds of memory during the middle childhood years. Now, I'd like you to have just a very basic idea of the different kinds of memory. If you're interested in learning more, there are classes in the psychology department in cognitive development that will go into this topic much more deeply. It's pretty fascinating, but with the limits of time, we're going to stick to trying to just understand the basics. So within memory, I'd like you to know about three different kinds. The first is sensory memory, what we also call the sensory register. And this is part of the information processing system which allows for incoming stimuli to come in and get stored just for long enough time that the individual can perceive it. So it has to do with, imagine you're touching a hot stove. You know there's a delay in time between when you touch it and when you feel the pain. That sensory memory is the moment of touch equals pain. And then as you withdraw it, now the experience is going to move into working memory. This is basically short-term memory, 5 to 7 seconds. It's where you store this current conscious mental activity. So in my example of touching a stove, it's the ow, I just touched a hot stove moment. Now, information in working memory will only get transferred to long-term memory if it's really important or if it's associated with a strong stimuli in the environment. Long-term memory is where we store the information theoretically forever. And in this case, the long-term memory piece would be, when the stove is hot, I probably shouldn't touch it because it will hurt. So that information can keep the person safer in the future. Now, during middle childhood, working memory is what's improving steadily and significantly. So if you've ever taken an IQ test, you may have been asked to repeat a set of numbers forward and backward. That's a task of working memory. And as children get to be older than 6, they are able to store 5, 7, 8 digits in a row. Being able to transverse that information, in other words, repeat the digits back, but this time doing it backwards in the order that you heard it, that is a higher level of cognitive manipulation that comes on in later ages. So working memory just allows you to store it. Later on, as a person becomes closer to 10 or 11, the ability to act on the information, reverse it, and store it becomes more salient. Long-term memory is virtually limitless by the end of middle childhood. Technically, you probably can remember all kinds of things if you have the sensory information to trigger the memory. Your memory storage expands across childhood, and your ability to retrieve those memories is what's most important. And that's where you may find certain sensory triggers to be helpful. If you smell something, for example, there's often a strong memory trace. During middle childhood, your frontal lobes or your prefrontal cortex is maturing, and children get better and better at using their working memory and at recalling and retrieving from their long-term memory. In addition to seeing improvements in memory in middle childhood, we also see qualitative improvements in the neurological organization of the brain in this developmental period. So the control processes or neurological mechanisms that help the brain to prioritize certain tasks, to pay attention to something, to organize, prioritize, or regulate, those control processes are called executive functions or executive process in developmental literature. And this ability to regulate your thoughts, your feelings, your movements grows an awful lot during middle childhood and will continue to improve with age and experience. In fact, another aspect of executive function that grows a lot in middle childhood is the ability to think about your thoughts, which we call metacognition, and the ability to think about what you remember, which we call metamemory. So, kind of consistent with what Piaget would say, the information processing theorists suggest that we see qualitative leaps in how sophisticated a child's thinking can be during this important period of middle childhood. So, in conclusion, I hope that you leave this lecture with a deeper understanding of how different theories contribute to our understanding of cognitive development in middle childhood. Information processing theory has allowed us to really make advances in how we assess a child's capacities. For example, we can do neuropsychological testing to look at specific types of memory and be able to characterize an individual person's profile as far as which kinds of memory are really strong for them and which kinds need support. That sort of objective assessment can absolutely help us to support improvements in development over time. Now, if you're interested in learning more about this, in addition to taking a cognitive psychology class, I'd recommend checking out some of the readings that I've posted in this module. Executive function skills are really important to understand, whether you are a parent, a teacher, or in the helping professions. They are also things that continue to develop for all of us through our 20s, and learning different strategies for managing or regulating our attention, promoting better planning, helping us recall things, all of those interventions could be thought of as an applied aspect of information processing theory. So thank you for your time and attention. This concludes part 1 of Chapter 12.